going to review a bridge exercise. Now, there are some considerations when we're doing a bridge in technique. So one way can really aggravate the low back potentially, and it can also create more of a sensation in the quads, the hip flexors, versus the posterior chain, the hamstrings and the glutes, which is what we're looking for, okay? So if I position myself here in this hook line position, we call it, if we have our legs out a little bit further, that's going to be a little bit more hamstring dominant. If we bring our legs in a little bit closer, it's going to be more glute dominant. I like to start with my legs at about, 90 degrees or so. Now, oftentimes when folks do bridges, they just think about lifting their hips up as high as they possibly can, right? And this is something that we typically see if folks have some degree of hypermobility, where you might not necessarily feel it as much unless you get to that like end range, or just because you have that flexibility. Oftentimes we're always trying to seek it out. So we want to give folks a different cue, because when we just bring our legs or bring our hips up as high as possible, we end up really hyper extending at the spine. So if we're sensitive to extension, we're just kind of like jamming ourselves into extension. So we want to think about making our femur bones long. So the cue for this is going to be pushing through the feet, but instead of thinking about this like vertical movement pattern, we want to use the almost like the line of our femur bones and making our femurs longer. You will not be able to get up as high. You will not have as much range of motion. That is okay. So again, I'm just putting my arms down for some support, and I'm lifting up with the intention of kind of driving through my femurs, driving my knees forward in this diagonal plane versus hyperextending at the spine. So give that variation a try, especially if it's different than what you're used to, and see if you're able to feel this a little bit more in the posterior chain, less in the front of the hip, and definitely less in the back.